off your cut time. There you go. Okay, awesome. Well, we're in this series. It's called Hold Your Own. Hold Your Own. And it's from the book of 1 Thessalonians, 5-chapter book, super simple in the New Testament. You can read it for yourself. In fact, I was invited by somebody from our church to do a 1 Thessalonians and 1 and 2 Thessalonians devotional. And so if you go on your YouVersion Bible app, you can look up 1 Thessalonians devotionals, and they're right there. So you can just track along with us that way. You can read along however you want to do it. It's all there for the taking. And so I want to begin this week, and we're talking about chapter 2. So again, if you want to read ahead, you can read chapter 3 for next week. But I want to talk about chapter 2 this week, and I want to start with a story. And this story involves a little bit of pain on my part, because I was completely stressed out. I was overwhelmed. I was a little bit beyond myself. When I was 18 years of age, I decided I was going to the ministry. I was heading on a career path to go into graphic arts. And that was my dream. That's what I wanted to do. And I was an artsy all the way through school and all this kind of stuff. And about 17 years of age, God tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're not going to do that. You're going to do this." And I'm like, "I don't want to." And he's like, "You're going to do it anyway." So I just did it. Okay, because don't argue with God, right? Anyways, I decided at that point I would unhook the job that I already had working for, he was an architect, he was an interior designer, and I was doing all of his computer work because he was an old guy, he knew all the old skills, he didn't know the computer, and I was working with him. I quit that job, and I started working at Honda of Canada in their assembly plant. And I know we got Ford just up the street, and Dennis Vermeulen works there, and others over the years. But I made cars. For 1 year, I was like a grunt on the assembly line. It was awesome. And so I was about 60 pounds lighter then. And so when they saw me coming, they're like, "Oh, you're a small guy. You're going to do a job that's inside the car." And so I was like, "Okay, sure." I'm there going, I don't even know how any of this works. And so just picture like the biggest building you've ever seen, and there's just cars everywhere, and they're all in various points of being built and put together. And so my first job, the first day, was a complete disaster. And I went home going like, I cannot do this. There's no way I can do this. I don't know humanly possible how anyone can do this. And it was putting in the carpet in the floor. So you had the frame, the chassis of the car. And you had to go and get this carpet, which was like this. It was like one of those Amazing Race challenges. And you pick it up, and you run over the car, and you put it in, and you got 1 minute to like get the car all laid out in the proper place. And then there was these little grommets that you had to kind of slam in where the rocker panels were on either side, and there was a stick shift, and you had to bring the thing through that, and there was all these like little things you do. Like it took me about 5-10 minutes to do this, just one, and you were given 1 minute. So I was like, and they're like, I don't think this guy's got the skills to do this. We're gonna move you over here. So after 1 day, I was so thankful because they took me off carpets. So thankful. And they put me on, they called it rear window, or rear view mirror, which is weird because there was 4 things I had to do. So within a minute, again, like Amazing Race, I had to jump in to the car, and there were some seatbelt bolts that had been bolted to the chassis of the car, and I had to torque check just to make sure that they were all at the proper torque. I had to torque check for those, so I had to bring my torque wrench with me. And then they had the inside panels that you make the car so beautiful, right? On the inside, all molded plastic. And there were 3 screw holes that held the inside panel on. And I mean, it was probably in about 2 inches, and you had this little tiny screw, and you had to reach up inside, and they had a slot where the screw would fit through, and you had to find, on the other side, you had to find a grommet, and you had to put the screw in there. I had to do 6 of them. Are you kidding me? I can't even do 1. And so I would like find it, and you're like, so you have these air guns, and you're trying to put it in there, you could not do it. And then after I got those done, if I ever did get those done, you had to turn around, get up, and you had to put in the light, the interior light, which is right over the head, put it in, and then a screw in that, which was actually not that hard, but you had to snap it in, and then you had to snap the cover on. And then, rear view mirror, you had to go up, put the mirror in, and then 3 bolts into the rear view mirror in 1 minute. 1 minute? I'm like, this is going to take me all day. I don't know, like who came up with this 1 minute dealio? And then I watched other guys do it, and it was nuts. Like these guys were just going, burp, 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 and then it'd be like, they'd have time left over. I was like, well, based on that, maybe if I apply myself here, I might be able to do it. Okay? And so I went home that night, and I'll tell you what, like, I woke up in cold sweats, and I woke up in a seated position with my hands in the position for the interior light. And I'm like, no, I don't have to work for you while I'm sleeping. I should not have to do this. This is slave labor. And I'm like trying to wake myself up. No, go to sleep, because you got to do that when you go to work. And then I went in there, and I thought, you know, the pay is so good, but this is impossible. So anyways, that was like, you know, Monday was carpet day. Tuesday was first day in rearview mirror. Third day was rearview mirror. And I was kind of like getting it a little bit, but by now you're getting sore and really tired. Thursday, I'm kind of like, I'm doing all right, but other people are still doing a lot of, like, I'd get in there and the mirror would already be in. And then I'd look up the row, and one of my coworkers would be like, hey, you know, you're welcome. I did that for you. And I've done the next 5 because I'm so good at my job. And I'm like, I can't even do this. And trying to find those, it was just painful. So about Friday, it was like check-in day. Because, like, you're on the bubble, right? When you're new, you're on the bubble. And it's like, okay, well, if you're not cutting the mustard, they're going to get somebody who can do it in under a minute. And we've given you 5 days. And I remember this like it was yesterday, because my team leader, his name was Sprouter, which I'm like, what parent did that? That cannot be a real name, Sprouter. This little guy with a little mustache, but that was his name. And then my coordinator, so I answered to my team leader answered to my coordinator, and so they were off to the side, and I could hear them out of the corner of my ear. Was that a thing? Out of the corner of my ear. And how's he doing? How's the new kid doing? And I could hear Sprouter, who because I have amazing people skills. It wasn't about me putting screws in. I was like, I'd just kind of try and butter him up, and like, maybe I can keep my job, you know what I'm saying? And I heard him say these words. He's like, he's holding his own. He's holding his own. Which was basically like this vote of confidence, like, he's not there yet. He got a long way to go, but he's giving it his guts. He's working with the team. I think if we give him enough time, he'll be okay. He's holding his own. I need you to know that by the end of that, end of about a month or whatever, I could do that whole process in about 30 seconds. And they told me, slow down. If you keep doing it so fast, they will give you more stuff. And so I learned a whole bunch about unions and all, even though Honda doesn't have a union. 18 years of age, all the stuff that you can learn. Holding your own. Have you ever been in one of those situations? Have you ever been in one of those situations where it's like, it's nip and tuck, and you're kind of like, I don't know if I can. It might have been work, or it might have been like parenting at a certain point, or it might have been a church thing, and you're just like, I am so out of my depth, but I have to do this. I think about Amazing Grace. Carolyn and I have been binging that the last couple of weeks, discovered that, and there was a new series on and stuff. And we're watching it, and some of the things these people have to do in an allotted time and stuff, it is like all they can do to hold their own. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe you resonate with that, maybe you had a work experience. Here's the connector. The connector. My belief is that following Jesus is amazing. Following Jesus is one of the best decisions that you will make. This is the best decision you will ever make with your life. To make him the Lord of your life, to follow him and his principles, like some of the songs we sang. It gives you a terra firma, it gives you a foundation to build out the rest of your life. It's amazing. But also, living for Jesus is fraught with adversity, challenge, dare I say even persecution? Can I say hardships? Right? Okay, yeah, living for Jesus is amazing, but it doesn't end there, right? There are all kinds of family challenges, there's financial challenges, there's health challenges, there's spiritual challenges, there's all kinds of things that come our way, both from within and from without. And so the question that we move forward into chapter 2 with is, how in the world are we going to hold our own when it comes to our belief in Jesus, our love for Jesus, our dedication to Jesus? Are you going to be able to hold your own? That's the question. So from last week, and Pastor Scott gave you the analogy of the batter, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, but I have a couple of definitions Just so that we're clear on this whole idea of hold your own. So the definition of hold your own is to be able to do something with sufficient level of skill, which is what I was trying to do at Honda, right? I was trying to get to the place where I could actually hold down my job. To retain a position of strength in a challenging situation and not to be defeated or weakened. To remain strong, to remain in a strong position when somebody is attacking you or competing with you. That's when you hold your own. Pastor Scott gave the analogy of the batter, right? And the batter's at the plate and the pitcher's got the better of him. And he's maybe on strike two. And all that batter wants to do is make contact with the ball and, allow his team to get to a place where they can score or get on base or whatever. And so what he does is he just fouls the ball off. He just tips it. He's like, nope, that's not the right pitch. And he just tips the ball and tips the ball and tips the ball until he finally does get his pitch and hopefully he can make contact. But in that process, he's just holding his own. He's just holding his own. Another kind of anecdotal definition, and I love history, as you know. November 10th, 1942. Winston Churchill, we were in the middle of a global war, right? World War II. And Winston Churchill is famous to use this exact phrase in one of his most famous speeches. And he says, we have not entered this war for profit or expansion, but only for honor and to do our duty in defending the right. If you think about that in spiritual terms, it's crazy. Let me, however, make this clear. In case there should be any mistake about it in any quarter, we mean to hold our own. We mean to hold our own. I have not become the king's first minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. You remember the scene, right? This is about a month before the U.S. came into the Second World War. And so right now it is Nazi Germany and Russia, if you remember correctly, and Italy. It's all of Europe against England. They've been through the entirety of the air bombardment and all that kind of stuff. Right, the war on Britain. And Winston Churchill, they weren't even sure whether they were going to go into war 2 years earlier than this. And now Winston Churchill has rallied England to the place where they are giving Nazi Germany all they can handle and then some of their allied forces. And Winston Churchill says this, you know what? Guys, we're going to hold our own here. We are up against the fiercest of all battles. In fact, the entire world is coming for us. But for us on this island, he just is bolstered with this courage. And he says, we mean to hold our own. I am not going to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. Hold our own. Hold our own. David, I don't know if you can hear, there's a little bit of a ring on this mic. Yeah. As we go through this series, and there's a key verse in 1 Thessalonians. In fact, there's a great little point form thing that Paul is saying. He must have been in a hurry at the end of the letter, because in chapter 5, he goes all point form on everybody, which doesn't normally happen, right, in the Bible. It's usually long, drawn out, runs on sentence. But anyways, in the middle of that amazing piece in the 5th chapter, he says these words. Test all things, hold fast to what is good. Or the New Living Translation says, but test everything that is said and hold on to what is good. It's kind of like, okay, guys, there's all this stuff happening out there. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Your job is to test it and hold on to what is good, or hold your own in the middle of all these things. So what was going on? We're going to talk about it. Well, actually, let me just back up 1 second. By the way, let me just say this. For 2 years, I've had the privilege of either editing my sermons after I preach them. Remember, I was preaching them up here for a while, and I could just clap my hands and I would just start over again. And then I'd go home and I'd make a beautiful video. And it looked like Pastor Rob did a great job preaching, but it took me 3 hours to compile that 20 minutes. Anyways, then over the last number of weeks, I've had to be able to speak twice. Well, we didn't have enough people in the first service, so you're getting it fresh today. But for me, I'm daunted. I'm I haven't even done a rehearsal here. So I'm kind of skating on thin ice, So just be gracious with me. Anyways, I say that to say, Paul also had a brilliant piece of scripture, a brilliant writing to the Ephesians. Instead of using the words hold his own, he talks about the idea of standing firm. Right? Ephesians 6, with the armor of God. It says, put on the whole armor of God so that you can take your stand. You can almost put those words in there. Hold your own. You put on the full armor of God so you can take your stand against the devil's schemes, right? And then he goes on to talk about we're not waging war against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities and rulers. He says, therefore, you, and this is us, this is an action step, we have to put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground or hold your own. You may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, to stand. And then he says, in 3 verses, stand firm then. And he talks about all of the armor of God that we put on so that we can stand firm. You know what I observe about this verse? Is that he never says, okay, go attack. Okay, now that you got your armor on, let's go attack. It's all about, guys, just to hold your own. Just to stand firm, you need to have all this on. Because it is tough out there. They're coming for you. The world's coming for you. Maybe your family coming for you. I don't know about that. Satan is coming for you. Like, it's tough. And for us to not admit that, we would be so naive. Paul admits it here, and he's like, hey, you know what? You guys need to stand firm. You need to put on the full armor of God so that you can stand firm, so that you can hold your own. And that's not even an offensive position where you're taking ground. It's just literally just holding your own. So the book of 1 Thessalonians is a fantastic book, guys. Some of the background story is this. A lot of scholars believe that either Galatians or 1 Thessalonians are Paul's very first letter, right? So he is like right out of the gate. This is super fresh for him. And it turns into quite the deal because he literally wrote the Bible. However, these are letters that went around to all these churches. Of course, you know that Paul went on a missionary journey and he went through what is called modern-day Turkey, which is also called Galatia, or where we get the term Galatians. It's actually pronounced Galata, but however, it's modern-day Turkey. And he establishes all these churches in there, in Ephesus and Thessalonica, scratch the Thessalonica, Ephesus, and there's a number of other churches that he establishes. He goes back to Jerusalem, and then he starts his second missionary journey, and that's where we find him here. And he goes to all these towns. Well, they hate him. They hate this gospel message that he's preaching. This Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus is the only God we should follow. Would you get out of here? You're messing everything up. Plus, people are starting to believe this stuff, and it's really causing us some trouble. So he literally is running from one city to the other for his life. I want to talk about hardship. If you want to read about it, Acts 16, 17, and 18 tell the story about the second missionary journey. Fascinating. You think, well, Paul is, doesn't God love Paul? Isn't Paul part of the burgeoning first century church? God should be protecting him. And it's like, no. Paul had to go through a ton of hardship. He had to hold his own. And so he gets to this place, he actually gets to a place where he's pretty defeated. He's in this area called Macedonia or Galatia. And he gets a call from the Lord. And God says, you know what I want you to do is I want you to go somewhere new. He gets what's called the Macedonian call, which is fantastic. Because up until then, Paul was just kind of making it up as he went. And then all of a sudden, God says, no, I want you to go here. And so Paul crosses the river and goes to modern-day Greece, right? There's still a city there called Thessaloniki, or Thessalonica. And that's where he goes to the Thessalonians, right? You with me? And so what happens is he goes there and he preaches the gospel. And it is insane. It's like a revival starts. It's like Billy Graham showed up in the place. And all of a sudden, it's like Just As I Am played, and hordes of people come to faith in Christ. Well, people are watching this going, what's happening here? And so after 3 weeks of being there, they send Paul packing. Paul is with Timothy. We talked about this last week. Timothy and Silas. And they run them out of town. Get out of here. We don't want to hear any more about your Jesus or your resurrected Lord or the only way to heaven. We don't want to hear that anymore. And they send him out of town. And what happens is you think that this church would just implode after 3 weeks. What Paul does is they run away for their lives. And then Paul, because Timothy probably drew the short straw, Paul's like, okay, Timothy, I want you to go back and check on those guys. Remember we started that church in Thessalonica? Yeah, where they were trying to kill us? He's like, yeah, go back and check them out. I got to stay here. Me and Silas, we got some things to do. And so Timothy goes by himself all the way back to Thessalonica to check on the status, on the progress that they're making. And so then Timothy comes back to Paul, and he goes, you wouldn't believe it. These guys, in the midst of all of that chaos, in the midst of that culture that hates them, and all of that adversity, these guys are thriving. Their church is growing. There is just this amazing sense of revival. They are more than holding their own against all odds. It's insane. It's just this miraculous story about the church just growing, where 3 weeks ago there wasn't a church, and now there's a church, and it's just burgeoning. And so you know what Paul does? He sits down and writes this letter to them. Pastor Mark. Doi. I have one less hour sleep too, right? So first service, and yeah, anyways. Pastor Scott talked about it last week. And so Paul sits down and he writes this letter. They had a bunch of questions. When Timothy came back, gave the report, gave them a bunch of questions. We'll answer those in the next couple weeks. And so Paul writes this letter. And so as I read through the second chapter, here's the two takeaways for me, and I'll pull out a little bit of the letter. You can read it when you go home. The second verse, or the second chapter. Because it's kind of like two reminders. Paul's like, hey, you know what? I loved being with you guys. You're just great. Like, this was awesome, and we came, and you guys accepted us, and we worked together, and you guys kind of got what I was saying, and I got what you were saying, and we kind of built this relationship. And he talks about it in this verse, like, I was kind of like your mother, I was kind of like your father, you were kind of like my kids, but you were teaching us, and it was just great. It was just like, you know how you have those things, right? Where, thank you for inviting me over for the roast beef dinner, and it was just like, you know, you have those dinner parties, and everything just goes great. That's what Paul talks about. But in the process of the second chapter, he talks about two reminders or two takeaways. And these are my own, but I'll show you in the second chapter what he talks about. Number one, and we've been establishing this all the way along, is that hardship is a thing. Hardship is a thing. If you're a card-carrying member of the human race, you're going to face hardship. Anybody with me? Right? You're going to face hardship. It's going to be financial. It's going to be relational. It's going to be health-wise. You name it. There's something that's going to happen, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. For the church in Thessalonica, they were facing all of those things and persecution and suffering. They were facing all kinds of adversity and hardship. And so there's a couple of verses here. I think it starts in verse 2. And just check out the hardship that these Thessalonians in this church are just pushing through as they hold their own. Paul says to the church in Thessalonica, he says, you know how badly we had been treated at Philippi. Remember that story? You can find that in the book of Acts. You know how badly we'd been treated at Philippi just before we came to you, and how much we suffered there. This is Paul and Silas, and then Timothy joined them later. Yet our God gave us the courage to declare his good news to you boldly in spite of great opposition. Hardship. Right? Let's go to the next verse. In 15 and 16, he says, for some of the Jews killed the prophets, and some even killed the Lord Jesus. Now they have persecuted us too. They failed to please God and all the work against all humanity, as they try to keep us from preaching the good news of salvation to the Gentiles. By doing this, they continue to pile up their sins. So here's Paul's idea. He's like, we're facing hardship. Well, no duh. All the prophets faced hardship. The prophets had these hard words against the people of God who are not living in the ways of God. And he was slapping them upside the head. These prophets were slapping them upside the head. You remember in the days of Elijah, and Elijah's going, she's killed everybody. Like, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one standing for truth. And so Paul's like, why should it be any different for us? Oh, and by the way, they also killed the sinless Son of God. They also killed him too. So this is not about, us getting a free pass because we believe in Jesus. This is kind of like, no, hardship is a thing. It's been a thing for ages. If you're going to stand for truth, you're going to have the benefits because that's awesome, but you're also going to face the hardships as well. Verse 18 says this. We wanted very much to come to you, and I, Paul, tried again and again, but Satan prevented us, which is an interesting statement. I wish he would have built that out a little bit more. But after all, what gives us hope and joy, and what will be our proud reward and crown as we stand before our Lord Jesus when he returns, it is you. Yes, you are our pride and joy. Paul, who had been through all kinds of adversity, is looking at them going through adversity and going, you guys are awesome. The way you're living out your faith, and there's all this adversity coming your way, and you're staying strong, and you're moving forward, and you're holding your own, it's incredible. Hardship is a thing. It's not unovercomable. The second thing that I take from this chapter is that we should, as believers in Jesus, live for God and not for man. This is so hard, guys. This is so hard. It's easy to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's so hard to do. Right? It's so hard to actually do this. But somehow, the church in Thessalonica did this. It's our MO, a lot of us, because I'm a, confessed people pleaser. Anybody else out there with the people pleasing? Right? It's just like, I will do whatever you want. Just do not be mad at me. Do not give me any trouble or struggle. Don't say a bad word to me. I want everything to be smooth. Am I talking to the choir here? But the problem is when we do that, sometimes we compromise our beliefs, don't we? Because we're kind of like, well, I don't want them to be mad at me, but they're kind of asking me to do something that's really against what I believe to be true on this side with God. So now I'm in a bit of a... And let me just encourage you. The Bible is clear that we should be living by and for the principles of God all day long. And then whatever happens over here is really not up to us. We know that we're probably going to have some kind of conflictual way, but we need to live by the principles of God. This is what Paul said to the church in Thessalonica. He said, we speak as messengers approved by God to be entrusted with the good news. Our purpose, get this, is to please God and not people. Obviously, they made a bunch of people mad, and he's encouraging them. Our purpose is to please God and not people. He alone examines the motives of the heart. Oh, by the way, you're going to stand before him one day. When it comes to eternity, those people at work or that family member or you're kind of like, tiptoeing around, they're not even going to be there. God's going to be there. And he's like, well, why didn't you do what I told you to do? Instead of doing what your aunt told you to do, or your cousin, or your boss, or whatever. Live by my principles. The second thing, the second verse is verse 6. As for human praise, we have never sought it from you or anyone else. This is Paul talking to the Thessalonians. He's like, even when we came there, we didn't really care what you guys thought of us. We were just giving you the gospel. You took it and ran with it, but we just really needed to kind of deliver our hearts. Like, we just needed to tell you what we knew to be true. Living for God and not for man. And then verse 10, it says, you yourselves are our witnesses. And so is God. You see the tension there? There's this, there are people involved, and then there's also God involved, that we were devout and honest and faultless toward all of you believers. And you know that we treated each other as, we treated each of you as a father treats his own children. We pleaded with you and encouraged you and urged you to live your lives in a way that God will consider worthy. For he called you to share in his kingdom and his glory. We have to live for God, come what may. If we believe the things of God, in order to hold our own, we need to back it up with some action, right? Oh, we believe this stuff. Well, we have to behave that way too. Hardships are going to come. The persecution is going to come. The adversity is going to come. And there's a time when we got to put our money where our mouth is, and we have to live for God, not for people. And that's what Paul is talking about here in Thessalonians. Like me on my first job, or that job. I had jobs before that. I had to work to hold my own. I'm scraping my knee. I'm exhausted. I'm sweating. I'm like, in my mind going, I don't think I can ever do this. Winston Churchill in the Second World War, he is looking at the global landscape and go, we're goners. Do you know how bad the odds are stacked against us? And he says, before the U.S. enters the war, he goes, November 10th, 1942, we need to hold our own. We're not going to be part of the liquidation of the British Empire. We're gonna die on this hill. We're going to hold our own. And whether you want to take the historical example or my example at work, in our church life, guys, we have to hold our own. You know what? There is more adversity coming. We live in a post-Christian culture. There's more adversity coming. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. One of the questions, I've already written the questions for small group, is like, what adversity does the church face in 2022? And there's a big list. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I'm just talking about the North American church, but what adversity does the church globally experience? And are we going to be able to hold our own? That's challenging. It's like, I wanted to come for the barbecue, Pastor, when they're passing out the burgers, but I'm not sure I'm signing up for the persecution and the suffering. It's like, okay, well, what do you believe then? Right? And we all go back to that and then believe. Live for God and not for man. I want to end on an encouraging note. We sang it at the end of, "It is well with my soul. Lord, haste the day, right, when my faith shall be sight, and the clouds will be rolled back like a scroll, and the trumpets shall resound, and the Lord shall descend, and even so it is well with my soul." We will be victorious. We will be victorious. Jesus has already given us the victory. It's just up to us to hold our own until we see that come to fruition. Amen?